the Psalms. So we've been doing this now for a number of weeks, looking at different Psalms and taking one idea from each of the Psalms we are looking at so that we can promote our well-being. And tonight is the turn of Psalm 37. So let's turn to Psalm 37. Now, it's a long psalm, but I think it's well worth reading, okay? So Psalm 37 tonight then. We've thought so far about Psalm 139, and we look after our well-being by focusing on God's knowledge of us. We've talked about Psalm 119 and the importance that Scripture has in our well-being. Psalm 55, we've looked at memory. Psalm 8, I think, was perspective. And we've looked at Psalm 42, 43, which was self-talk. Well, let's turn to Psalm 37 then. And we'll read the whole of the psalm. We'll then talk about the structure of the psalm. And then we'll dig down into the psalm and think about what this psalm has to say. So let's turn to it in our Old Testament, Psalm 37. And as I say, we'll read the whole of the psalm. Psalm 37 says, "Do not fret because of the wicked, nor be envious of those workers of iniquity. For they shall soon be cut down like the grass and wither as the green herb. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and feed on his faithfulness. Delight yourself also in the Lord, and he shall give you the desires of your heart." So Psalm 37, verse 5, "Commit your way to the Lord, and trust also in him, and he shall bring it to pass. He shall bring forth your righteousness as the light, and your justice as the noonday. Rest in the Lord, and wait patiently for him. Do not fret because of those who prosper in his way, because of the man who brings wicked schemes to pass. Cease from anger and forsake wrath. Do not fret, it only causes harm. For evildoers shall be cut off, but those who wait on the Lord, they shall inherit the earth. For yet a little while, and the wicked shall be no more. Indeed, you will look carefully for his place, and it shall be no more. But the meek shall inherit the earth, and shall delight themselves in the abundance of peace. The wicked plot against the just, and gnashes at him with his teeth. The Lord laughs at him, for he sees that his day is coming. The wicked have drawn the sword and have bent their bow, to cast down the poor and needy, to slay those who are of upright conduct. Their sword shall enter their own heart, and their bows shall be broken. And so a little that a righteous man has is better than the riches of many wicked. For the arms of the wicked shall be broken, but the Lord upholds the righteous. The Lord knows the days of the upright, and their inheritance shall be forever. They shall not be ashamed in the evil time, and in the days of famine they shall be satisfied. But the wicked shall perish, and the enemies of the Lord as well. Like the splendor of the meadows, they shall vanish into smoke. They shall vanish away. The wicked borrows and does not repay, but the righteous shows mercy and gives. For those blessed by him shall inherit the earth, but those cursed by him shall be cut off. The steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord, and he delights in his way. Though he fall, he shall not be utterly cast down, for the Lord upholds him with his hand. So Psalm 37 then, verse 25, "I have been young and now am old. Yet I have not seen the righteous forsaken, nor his descendants begging bread. He is ever merciful and lends, and his descendants are blessed. Depart from evil and do good, and dwell forevermore. For the Lord loves justice and does not forsake his saints. They are preserved forever, but the descendants of the wicked shall be cut off. The righteous shall inherit the land and dwell in it forever. The mouth of the righteous speaks wisdom, and his tongue talks of justice. The law of God is in his heart. None of his steps shall slide. The wicked watches the righteous and seeks to slay him. The Lord will not leave him in his hand, nor condemn him when he is judged. Wait on the Lord and keep his way, and he shall exalt you to inherit the land. When the wicked are cut off, you shall see it. I have seen the wicked in great power and spreading himself like a native green tree. Yet he passed away, and behold, he was no more. I even looked for him, but could not find him. So mark the blameless man and observe the upright, for the future of that man is peace. But the transgressors shall be destroyed together. The future of the wicked shall be cut off. Now the salvation of the righteous is from the Lord. He is their strength in the time of trouble. And the Lord shall help them and deliver them. He shall deliver them from the wicked and save them, because they trust in him. And I hope reading that psalm shows you what a wonderful psalm this is. And it's a wisdom psalm. And the idea is every verse contains wisdom. And so we could do no better than to look at each of these verses in turn if we had the time and focus on all of them. But we can't do that. So I just want to give you a sense of, a flavor of this particular psalm. It's a psalm of wisdom, and it's a psalm of experience. And the psalmist who speaks here speaks from a lifetime of experience. And he is reflecting on the lessons that he's learned throughout a long life as a believer in God. And what he does particularly is he shares the wisdom that he has about the wicked and about the righteous. And what we'll see is that the psalmist sets up the wicked and the righteous in this psalm for a series of contrasts. But what I want to note at this stage is simply that our psalmist is speaking from experience. Now, before we look at the structure and get into the psalm, I'm sure you noticed when we read it earlier that this psalm seems to have been a favorite of Jesus himself during his ministry. And what you and I know as the Beatitudes build on Psalm 37. And I'm sure you noticed, for example, verse 10. So just look at verse 10 of this psalm, Psalm 37. For yet a little while, and the wicked shall be no more, but the meek, verse 11, the meek shall inherit the earth. Now, Jesus takes that out of Psalm 37 and he develops it in the Beatitudes. And in fact, verse 22 of this psalm, which talks about blessed by him and they shall inherit the earth, that seems to be the key verse that Jesus uses in the Beatitudes. The word beatitude, you remember Matthew 5, the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, he talks about the blessed, who the blessed are, and he includes that blessed are the meek, that they shall inherit the earth. Well, you see that in verse 22 of Psalm 37. So we could very easily examine this psalm simply from the point of view of how Jesus uses it and builds on it in his Sermon on the Mount. Just notice it, if you will. So let's look at this psalm then. And what I want to do is show you that what we have here is the voice of experience. That's the first thing. The second thing is I want to focus on the use of the word fret. And fretting is something that this psalmist wants us to stop doing. And he says 3 times in this psalm that we are not to fret. And in fact, the psalm opens with this voice of wisdom telling you not to fret. Look at verse 1. Do not fret because of the evildoer. Now, it doesn't matter that he mentions the evildoer there, because the psalmist has in his life fretted over the wicked. But really, he's keen to get the message across that we shouldn't fret about anything. So look at verse 7. Rest in the Lord and wait patiently for him. Do not fret because of him who prospers in the way. So there's the second urge from this psalmist, not to fret. And then you see exactly the same in verse 8. Cease from anger and forsake wrath. Do not fret. And here is the great phrase. I want you to underline this, okay? If you underline in your Bible, do it now. And if you don't, but you try to remember one thing, this is the one thing to remember from Psalm 37. So the title for Psalm 37 that we are going to give is Do Not Fret. Fretting causes harm. Now, can you see it? It's as clear as day at the end of verse 8. Do not fret, it only causes harm. Now, who does it cause harm to? And of course, the answer from our psalmist is fretting only causes harm to the one who is doing the fretting. So whatever you fret about, you're harming yourself in doing that fretting. You're not harming anyone else, you're harming yourself. Now, you may harm someone else because whilst you are busy fretting, you're going to put great strain on any relationships that you might have. So I want you to notice that, and we'll say more about fretting in a moment or two. That's the second thing. And then the third thing we'll do in this wonderful psalm, and it is a wonderful psalm, is I want you to notice that the psalm contains a number of commands. And the commands are summed up with one word, and they are imperatives. So this old wise psalmist is urging us with a series of words that we need to pay attention to. And it would do us well to look at each one in turn and practice each one, and all of us will benefit as a result. So let me show you. The first of these words is in verse 4. Now, I've highlighted a few in the notes, but I haven't highlighted them all. The first one is verse 4, delight. Delight yourself in the Lord, and he shall give you the desires of your heart. So the word delight comes with great force, great command, great urgency, great emphasis, delight. Now, if you go to the next verse, verse 5, you got another one of these words, and it's the word commit. Now, I may say a little bit more about that one, but let's see how we get on. The next one is in verse 7, and it's the word rest. Now, you just build this picture now. Take these words and put them together, and it invites you into this psalm. The psalm says, delight, commit, rest. Verse 8, cease. Cease from anger. And there's word after word, isn't there, as we go down into this psalm. He seems to take a rest round about verse 8, and then as we go down into the psalm, he gets back into the swing of things and giving us these wonderful words that have great authority. So, for example, verse 27 is the word depart. Depart from evil. And then you can see another one in verse 34, and it's the word wait. And then verse 37, mark. Now, I can't emphasize enough. It's almost as if these words are hooks. And what the psalmist is doing is hanging his wisdom on each of these hooks in turn. And he's saying to us that if we can practice just these words, pay attention to the blameless man, he says in verse 37. What do you pay attention to? The things you put your mind on. Put your mind on the righteous man, verse 37. So can you see how great these words are? So the third thing that we'll do is we might take a look at some of them in turn. So let me summarize. First thing, the voice of experience. The second thing, do not fret. That's our title for this psalm. And the third, I want to just choose some of these great words that the psalmist urges onto us, okay? But let's think about the structure of this psalm. And what you've got is a psalm that you can divide, if you want to, into 4 sections. So let's just run through that quite quickly then. So Psalm 37, and the first section is from verse 1 down to verse 11. And what you've got in the first section of this psalm is the psalmist reflecting on the relationship between the believer and God. And he is telling you, what has he learned throughout his life about the relationship a believer has with God. And the one major idea in this first section is summed up with the word comfort. He seeks to comfort the believer in his or her relationship to God. So that's a wonderful first section of Psalm 37. The believer and his Lord and the comfort that can be found there. Then take a look at the Psalm 12 through to 24. And what we've got here is that contrast I mentioned earlier between the wicked and the righteous. And our friend, the psalmist, is contrasting the wicked with the righteous. And we need to be clear then, who does he mean by the wicked? And what I hope is clear to you is he's not talking about wicked people who are very immoral and, I don't know, murderers or burglars. He uses the term wicked to describe everyone who isn't a Christian, everyone who is not a believer in the Lord. They are the wicked. And what our friend does is he describes the wicked to us. And he describes the effect the wicked can have on the believer. So he says this, think of non-Christian people, think of non-believers. What's their life like? Well, their life can be fab. They can have lots of things. The wicked can prosper. The wicked can be wealthy and happy. The wicked can have all the material goods in the world. The wicked can do well. And then the psalmist says, as you look at that as a believer in God, and you see just how much the non-believer can prosper, you can be very tempted to think, why am I a follower of God? And the psalmist has spent a lifetime reflecting on, why should we follow God if all those around us are doing well, having a great time, and getting on with life? So this is what he reflects on in this section, verse 12 through to verse 24. And then he talks about the righteous. And he says sometimes the life of the righteous is really difficult. And sometimes the righteous are hungry. And sometimes the righteous are oppressed and afflicted. And the righteous life can be very difficult. So he wants to share his wisdom about the righteous life and why we should remain righteous even when all those around us are having a great time. So that's the section then, second section, verse 12 through to verse 24. Then can you look at the third section, 25 through to 36. Now this is the bit that I mentioned to you at the start. Here we have the voice of experience. This is the man telling us that he is sharing with us what he has learned. And there are two statements, I'm sure you know already, that emphasize that what we have here is a man telling us what he has learned. So take a look at verse 25. I have been young and now am old, yet I have not seen the righteous forsaken, nor his descendants begging bread. So the first observation this psalmist is giving from his own experience is what he has learned about the righteous life, about the believer in God. What has God proved to be in the life of the righteous? So this man shares that with us from verse 25 down as far as verse 34. He's going to tell us. And then in verse 35, he gives us more of his own experience. Verse 35. I have seen the wicked in great power and spreading himself like a native green tree. Yet he passed away, and behold, he was no more. So here's his experience now, having lived a long life, thinking about the wicked in power, political leaders, kings, tyrants, persecutors, evil leaders with great power, who here 1 minute seem to rule the world, and the next they're gone. So he wants to share what he has understood about how the wicked seem to have everything 1 minute, and then the next they have nothing. So that's the section, then section 3, that gives us the voice of experience. And then finally, the last bit of the psalm, section 4, verses 37 through to 40. And this section looks to the future. And it looks to the future of the believer, but it also looks to the future of the wicked. What does the future hold for the one who is not a believer in God? So let's take a look at this future from verse 37. Mark the blameless man and observe the upright, for the future of that man is peace. Now the word we've got here is shalom, well-being. That's our future then. But the transgressors shall be destroyed together. The future of the wicked shall be cut off. And this psalm, like many other psalms, has that, now, ready for the word now? It has an antithetical theme. The righteous, but the wicked. And its opposites. The righteous this, and the wicked that. And you notice that, I'm sure, not just in the Psalms, but in Proverbs especially, where we have this black and white idea in one verse. The righteous this, but the wicked that. Well, that's what we've got here. And so the future of the righteous is peace, but the future of the wicked is destruction. Verse 40, the Lord shall help them and deliver them and save them because they trust in him. And the psalm ends with this note of trust. So can you see the 4 sections then? They're very different to each other, and they are a wonderful contrast within the one psalm. So we've seen the voice of experience then. It's in section 3. I have been young and now I'm old. I have seen the wicked. So let's come back to think about fretting. Okay. So I've pointed out the verses that tell us not to fret. Verse 1, do you remember? Verse 7 and verse 8. What is fretting? And fretting is a busy word. It's a word of energy. It's a word of activity. And it stands in contrast in the psalm to the word wait and to the word rest. Okay, so whatever we understand rest to be, or waiting on the Lord to be, fretting is the exact opposite. And for some people, to fret is to be like an animal, a busy animal, perhaps an animal busy building its nest, or an animal rushing around feeding its young. It's this idea of being busy in your thoughts, letting your thoughts go round and round and round your head in a very kind of energetic manner, but you're doing it over a subject over which you have no control. Okay, that's what fretting is. Spending long periods of time becoming distressed about things you have no control over. And of course, for the sake of our psalm, it's the wicked. But the principle is anything about which you can do nothing is something you shouldn't spend time thinking about. And I would be bold enough to say some of you here on this Zoom meeting are terrible fretters. You spend a great deal of your time during the day worrying about and thinking about and dwelling on and getting upset by things you can't ultimately change, or you can't control, or you can't impose your own will on whatever it is that you're worrying about. So that's what the word fret means. And it's a wonderful word because it's a bit more busy than anxiety. It gives you the impression of the effort involved, how exhausting it is, how it consumes our time, how we build in our heads great pictures of disaster that may never come to anything. We busy ourselves creating scenarios in our head from all kinds of points of view, and yet it's all just a waste of time, and the only one who's been harmed by it is ourselves. And I like to think that the psalmist knows what it is to fret, and at the end of his life he wants you to know just what a waste of time it all has been. It's been so unnecessary, and it's added to his distress. It's harmed him. Now, just as a kind of thing to think about on your own, if you wish, look at the end of verse 8. Cease from anger and forsake wrath. Now, that verse will be quoted in the New Testament by Paul and I think by Peter. Do not fret, it only causes harm. He's describing the emotional turmoil that fretting leads to. So in this case, it leads to anger, passion, strong emotion, frustration. That's what's being emphasized here. And the harm that does to our own well-being. We get worked up as we imagine a situation. And we can imagine the situation so effectively that we're actually having the emotional response there and then. And we are harmed. Now, what I want you to think about is this. Our psalmist is talking about how the wicked want to harm us. And did you notice in the psalm, he uses military imagery. He talks about the bow and he talks about the arrows. So he says that the wicked want to harm us. But you know what's really sad, he says? We are surrounded by all this wickedness, but where does our harm come from? What harms us? And of course, the answer is we harm ourselves. And that to me is quite a tragic note, that it's not the wicked who can harm us. They use their bow against themselves. You can see that in verses 12, 13, 14, and 15. But what really matters is we harm ourselves here. And that's what he wants us to avoid. So I think that's enough talk about fretting. I want to leave it with you so that you think about it for yourselves, and especially on the harmful nature of fretting. Let's finish by some of these wonderful words, and I've highlighted 5 of them to help us think about our well-being. And the first is verse 5, and it's the word commit. Now, this word will also be discussed in the New Testament by Peter and by Paul, I guess. And the idea here is what you do matters. So this word is behavioral, okay? The activity of the believer is important. It's not just what we say, it's not even what we think, but it's actually what we do. And we need to commit ourselves to doing certain things. So a word of caution. One of the words I've always hated in my Christian life is the word commitment. And there was a lot of nonsense talked years ago about being a committed believer. And are you committed? And it used to grate on me when people used to talk about being committed, as if we were a sort of special breed, the committed Christian. And what I'm really glad about is that we don't talk like that anymore. And I think that's a major step forward. The commit here in verse 5 isn't the committed Christian nonsense. It's the idea that you act on what you know. It's acting on what you've learned. It's having confidence in a practical way on your understanding. So it doesn't just stay up in the head, it comes down and out into the world in which we live. That's what the word commit means. And it's a great word. And it's the link between our well-being and what we do. And what we do impacts our well-being. And if we stop doing things, our well-being is deteriorated. But if we start doing the things we used to, our well-being improves. Now, this is something to discuss, okay? Because I don't want any of you getting the wrong end of the stick. Okay, but there's a very clear link between behavior and well-being. And I'm not talking about, and I'm stressing it again, and I don't want to offend any of you, but I'm not talking about being a committed Christian. I'm saying if we put into practice, if we bring into every day what we know, then that is what commitment is. It's acting on, or I prefer acting out what we've learned. Okay, that's the word commit. Great word, one that could really be studied just on its own. So the other words then, depart, verse 27, depart from evil and do good. Now, I don't want to comment on that, but I just want you to notice that this is another verse from this psalm that is going to be taken up in the New Testament and in the epistles. And I think it's wonderful how Jesus, Paul, and Peter, they dig into this psalm and they recognize the value of this psalm and the wisdom of this psalm for the early New Testament church. And it's really remarkable how often that is the case. And then the next word is verse 34, and it's the word wait. Now, wait is one of the great words of the Old Testament, and it's one of the great words of the Psalms. It's found in Isaiah, wait on the Lord, wait patiently for him, we are told here. Okay, it's the idea of, well, it's the opposite of fretting. It is not trying to take everything into your imagination and bring everything down into your own realm. It's recognizing what belongs to God. What is in God's hands? What does he hold responsibility for? What is he going to work out? What will he bring to pass? That's what waiting is. And I want you just to think how often the word wait is found, especially in the Old Testament. And it's again, as I say, one of the great words. Last one then, and it's the word mark in verse 37. We've kind of brushed against this word already, and it means what fills your thoughts. What are you spending your time thinking about? Now again, mark is opposite to fretting. Waiting is opposite to fretting. Resting is opposite to fretting. Committing is opposite to fretting. Okay, so mark, what fills your thoughts? It's about content. So when it comes to our thoughts, we have subject matter, don't we? What are we thinking about? Fretting is when you're thinking about things that are just going to cause you distress. Mark, think about the future. Think about the glory to come. Think about the peace that is ours, the peace that God will bring to us when he works to save us. Let that fill your minds and fill your hearts. So I hope you get a sense of how wonderful Psalm 37 is. And really, I would encourage you to look at each verse and try and mine each verse for as much as you can get, because it is really a treasure of wisdom. But there is one thing I'd like us to discuss together. We could discuss many things, but there's one thing particularly, and it's verse 25. Years ago, I heard a preacher speak on this verse, and he took as his text, I have been young and now am old, yet I have not seen the righteous forsaken, nor his descendants begging for bread. And this young preacher, I mean, I was young myself at the time, this young preacher said from the pulpit, no Christian will ever die of starvation. This text proves that, and quoting this guy now, people, that whether you're in Africa as a believer or India as a believer, where there are terrible famines and deep poverty, you will never, if you're a believer, know hunger. Now, can you imagine what kind of response he had to his sermon? He preached this sermon in the church that Tracy and I was a member of at the time. And it was a kind of large congregation full of professional people, very missionary-minded people. What kind of experience do you think he had? What was the response to saying, no Christian will ever suffer famine or hunger? Well, I want to discuss that with you. And I want to discuss with you how we are meant to interpret this verse. So, which verse is it? Verse 25. What way is the right way, would you say? for opening up this verse to our understanding. So there you go, Psalm 37, and we've given it the title, Do Not Fret. Thank you very much.